Cool. Welcome to the LLM Instance Gateway Sync Up. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. We are following CNCF guidelines, code of conduct, so please act accordingly. And to jump right in, I'm going to share my screen. It's got an infinity mirror for a moment. Cool. So I have my agenda item where I want to talk about the API proposal. I've made some changes this morning and some as most recent as a few minutes ago. I tried to get the general change log here if you've looked over the proposal. But before we dive in, as this I hope to be the meat of this discussion, is there any other items anyone wants to bring up? Cool.
You want to discuss permissions for like owner's file for repository?
Yeah, so Clayton opened up a PR for that, where he's adding himself and Abdullah as approvers and myself as a reviewer. If there are any other primary contributors that would like to be added as approvers, feel free to reach out to myself, Clayton, cut a PR. But yeah, we did get that mostly resolved, which is good. So to jump right in, I'm in my own fork here on this branch. Want to discuss kind of the two main objects. We have our backend pool, which is your group of your nodes. And then you have your LLM use case, which we're going to focus on more here because this is the CRD we intend to expose to users. An LLM use case set is, as it implies, a set of these use cases. This allows someone, such as we use the persona LLM use case owner to define multiple use cases. We kind of went over this last week. Some things I want to point out is we are only exposing a single objective. We have a very long name here. That's open for discussion, but the implication is that we are allowing a P95 latency. And if this objective is specified, we are placing these use cases in a higher priority class. So in the face of resource scarcity, a higher priority request will be preserved and lower priority requests will be rejected. I will fix the formatting here and go down to 80 characters, but that is the general thought here. Any thoughts on this API design, or we allow optional target models so you can split weights off LoRa adapters, or if you don't, we just assume that your LoRa name is this model name. Thoughts here? Thoughts on this name here? Cool. I'll carry right along. Another decision that we have made specifically for MVP is that the backend is proposed to be implicit. We are doing this because currently the backend would be a subset or superset of the service. And so we would either have to make service decisions on a user's behalf or basically make a backend ref for the backend pool to a service. So for the short term, while we don't have fields within the backend pool, we're just going to rely on an annotation on a service to imply that it's part of a backend pool. Curious for those thinking about using this, if this is something that makes sense, that they would use, the ergonomics here from a UI or UX perspective. I would really love feedback here if anyone has any.
Can you reiterate why it is implicit? Not sure.
Sure. So for the backend pool, we wouldn't specify much beyond what is already specified in a service. So the field we had was a pod selector. We had some policy controls, but those policy controls we don't believe would be in scope for MVP. So to specify a backend pool, we would either need to make service decisions on the user's behalf, but it's very likely that each user will want to specify their service to their model servers or pods a little bit differently. So then we would just make a service field. So if you were to make a backend pool object, you would have to specify your service and your backend pool. where if we make it implicit and just make an annotation on the service, you're just specifying the service. So it is a little less configuration.
And then do you, okay.
Yeah, so our controller would
read, I see. So you basically read all the services with the annotation and then you choose from them?
Exactly. So the annotation, we would have something specific where it would be like backend pool : name of the backend pool. And so then we would group those together. Do I have an example? Yeah, let me pull it up. Sorry, 1 second. Need to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Right here. Cool. Let me get this tab out. I apologize. Give me 1 second. All right. So this is what I was imagining, something like this, where I just made a very simple service. I'm assuming you can see my screen. Just want to share it. Yeah, sweet. Yep. So we have this backend pool annotation. Our controller would watch services, look for this annotation, and if it has this Llama 2 pool, we would create. And I think behind the scenes, we'll still have a backend pool object, but it just is trying to save the user config until there's an actual need for it. But this would create this Llama 2 pool, which could then be referenced by a gateway to route to. And you would affix your LLM use cases.
Do you have an example of a gateway referencing this pool though?
Yeah. Let me just pull this tab over here so I can do this a little bit quicker. Yeah, so.
You should have one in the proposal, right?
Yeah, it's just a little bit different since we changed some things. So I'm trying to keep it up to date. So here we have our gateway, and then we have our HTTP route, and it references this backend pool. And I did kind of want to discuss this because we are exposing the kind as the backend ref. We may want an explicit object. There are trade-offs here for certain, but this is how it would be specified in an API or an HTTP route with that backend ref there. And then I will pull up a use case set. Also does this.
Yeah, at some point we'd have like a fuller object that was a backend pool, right?
Yes, right. That is, I'm expecting that we will need that in the future.
Yeah.
But.
Is there, I guess, in terms of discoverability, right? Like if I'm a user of it and then I want to identify whether one of my backend pools is being used in somewhere, how would I do that now?
Right. And that's something I've given thought to. Your use case sets, we would want some listing or some configurations that these are referencing a pool of yours. In this case, we're still using that Llama 2 pool. This would be a list. Happy to hear feedback here on how people would prefer, but that is an option here.
I see. So just to get the whole picture in mind, I was involved in the initial discussions of the API, but like, so everything starts from the LLM use case set, and then the pool ref, right? So you're referencing a pool, and how so, and this so. Like I'm missing how the all picture comes together. So like I understand traffic comes to the gateway, then from the gateway you have the route and the route referencing the pool, but then the use case set, how does that Like, what's
Yeah.
this ref thing is doing, basically? That's my question. Let's say I see the pull ref that you highlighted there. What's it? Yeah.
Sure. So we are currently relying on xproc, which does our body-based routing. So once this backend ref is essentially to our xproc solution, excuse me, and then that will use our use cases to route correctly. What we're trying to do is offload body-based routing from a gateway solution, which would be a heavy amount of effort. It's a little bit easier to handle it in our xproc solution here. So sorry, just real quick, to walk through your example. So it comes, let's assume we have our HTTP route rule. We've already affixed to that one, and that routes to a backend pool. That will go to our xproc solution, which will route based off the model name. So that's within the body, and that will select based off our use cases that are specified. So if we passed in SQL code assist as the model parameter, and since you weren't in the previous discussions, I will clarify, we are heavily assuming the OpenAI API spec. So that's what we're using for MVP. So if you pass that in, because we don't specify a target model like we do in this NPC bot, we will assume that this is the name of your LoRa adapter, and it will pass this right through to your model server. But with NPC bot, we're trying to roll out a new version to V2, and it will do a 50-50 split based on that. Hopefully that's more helpful.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, most like the routing decision is completely within the LLM use case set. So from the HTTP route, you're gonna reference to the backend pool, and then if the backend pool has any LLM use case attached, so then the routing would be there. What happens if the backend pool doesn't have any references to it?
Yeah, so that was one of the policy fields we thought about in the backend policy, is if you want to allow wildcard. So exactly like you said, in the simplest use case where someone sets up a backend pool and there are no use cases defined, if they were to set that flag to true, we would basically just allow you to pass through, and whatever you set as the model name would go directly to the model server. We would default that to false, given that there's security concerns if people had sensitive data behind certain adapters, things like that. Those are considerations we had, and kind of deciding if that kind of policy is within MVP scope. And that's absolutely the intent of this discussion here. Curious on your thoughts.
I see. I'm still trying to understand, like, if I have this service annotation in this case, and then I don't have any LLM use case set, so I have the service annotation, and then behind the scene you create a backend pool service, and then I'm within the HTTP route, I'm referencing the backend pool, and maybe you answered that and just didn't catch it, but like, and then the backend pool does not have any LLM use case attached to it. So then what happens?
In our current design, we would reject a request because we're not exposing any control. Yeah.
Do you indicate anything, like maybe, like, a status on the HTTP route, or like anything that is useful for the user, like why their request is being rejected?
We could have our backend pool could specify that an unauthorized is probably what we would specify. As far as like a Kubernetes status, that is a good question where that would percolate. HTTP route seems fair. I'm actually interested to hear more of a networking perspective. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we can't. So I'm trying to remember the specific question. Is this about rejecting a single request or rejecting attaching a pool?
Rejecting a single request, kind of where would we percolate an error within Kubernetes, or would we?
The specific question was, like, if you have a reference to a backend pool which does not have any LLM use case referencing to it. So then my understanding from Kellen is that the request would be rejected, but is there any indication for the user why the request is rejected?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think this becomes a lot easier if and when we have a backend pool resource, because then we just drop it on the backend pool and say, hey, there's nothing here, and like we can't accept this because there's nothing to do. Like there's no configuration attached to it. It's kind of like, you know, in gateway terms, if you had a gateway without any route configuration, everything that went there would just get a 404. I feel like you end up with a 404 here too. So yeah, this is worth some more discussion.
I'm +1 to this is a pro, like one of the benefits of having a backend pool. But then, like, if we still want to go in the lean way with the HP route, like with the service annotation, so then we can still publish the status on the HP route, right? Like similarly, if you have a backend,
you can propagate it up
to another. So for if I'm not mistaken, right now in a HP route, if I reference a service which is doesn't exist, then we just pop up a status, right?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
But the main question
actually,
sorry.
Yeah, actually, I need to look back at the spec. What we do if we point to a service that exists but has no backends, which feels more analogous to what we're describing here. I don't know. I can't remember offhand what we do in Gateway API, if anything. So,
would it be the same controller, like for this case? Would the same controller reconcile the LLM use case set and the HP route?
So that is going to depend entirely on the implementation. So, you know, if you look at this, I don't think the API proposal goes too far into the implementation details, but it's at least theoretically possible to have two different layers here. So one of the goals I've had as I've been looking at the overall architecture here is that you could build, or we can build, a extension that could plug into many, if not most, gateway implementations. So basically, you know, a lot of gateway implementations support something like xproc, for example, where you can call out to some kind of external service for routing guidance and other things, often used for authorization, for example. So in that case, you may have that xproc be the thing that implements everything below HTTP route, and your built-in gateway doing everything that it does today, right? So if you want to plug this kind of proof of concept reference implementation into Envoy Gateway, I think that's one we've been doing some of the initial testing with. But, you know, pick your gateway implementation and plug this in, and hopefully it just works.
And I'm interested, would Envoy Gateway need to reconcile this LLM use case set, right?
No, not in this world.
So okay. So so this brings me to the question: how would it be? It would be a little bit hard to figuring out in the controller that reconciles the HTTP route. Let's say in this API case, that the backend pool basically doesn't have any LLM use case attached to it. I mean, it's still possible, right? Everything is persisted eventually, but like,
yeah, I mean, I think the separation of concerns you'd want there is you'd want something to write to the backend pool. Like if you have two different controllers working, you'd want the controller that's implementing the backend pool to write that's, you know, some kind of status that says, hey, there's nothing here. And then the controller, you know, Envoy Gateway, for example, understands enough to say, okay, something is wrong with this backend pool, and I'll signal that on the route.
Okay. Yeah, so I think it's a. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question. So can multiple backend pools be all pointing to a single use case, LLM use case? And also, can you have a single LLM use case on multiple backend pools?
Yeah. So it's a little bit backwards where the LLM use case actually points up at the pools, but yeah, you could have the same use case available on multiple pools. I think that will actually be fairly common. And let's say that you're moving a use case between different hardware or VMs, pods, etc. That's a way to do it. So you might do canary splitting between, like this model, I want to send 10% to this new hardware and 90% to this old pool.
Right. And to clarify, multiple pools pointing to a single use case. As Rob mentioned, we actually have the use cases pointing to the pools. This is a convenience factor. Excuse me. It doesn't actually functionally do anything different unless you have an HTTP route that is specifically splitting on pools. Because we're routing to pools, the use cases works a little differently here. Again, this was a design decision that we made. Would love user feedback as to how this might operate. Bye, Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that clarifies.
So if I have let's say I'm a user, I have everything kind of working right now without this LLM gateway, right? And then I want to try it out. How do I opt in? Like, do I just go to my service, put the annotation? Once I have the annotation in, I can just submit the LLM use case.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that. I mean, unfortunately, just the practicality of it, you're going to have to update your controller, whatever gateway implementation you're using to a version that supports this kind of integration. Hopefully, it's fairly minimal work for gateway control. Hopefully, most gateway controllers can do fairly small set of work and then just, work with this extension. Yeah.
And then I'm missing, is this LLM gateway repo would also provide the thing that reconciles the LLM use case set?
Absolutely.
The reason this is in working group serving and why it has its own repo is we want to iterate quickly on both the extension, like both the code behind the extension and the API surface. So whatever we see here is almost certainly not going to be the final beta or GA API. I'd even go if you look at the objective here, there's one really long objective name. I forget what we called it, but it's I mean, I view that as this ultimate signal that this is a temporary, we're just working here. But I think that the goal that we'd have is ideally, perfect. We'll ship it as is. But ideally, we can provide the same interface for any gateway controller that wants to integrate with this, so that once they support V0 of this or whatever we ship as the first thing, they don't really need to make any further changes. Basically we just iterate here, APIs change, whatever, but they don't need to be particularly aware of the underlying APIs that's hidden away in this extension.
Okay. And this implementation here would basically expose an envoy, like pods that reconciles it and just configure the not necessarily envoy, but the envoy, the export pointer.
Exactly, because this POC is relying on Envoy's xproc extension mechanism. So that's how Envoy calls out to external processes. That's it. But the actual pods would just be simple code Nothing that unique.
Right.
Okay, fair.
Cool. Unless there's other questions, I'll kind of keep rolling here. To drill in, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, and Rob kind of mentioned it. This objective here to drill in is the name can change, but is the general concept acceptable for an MVP? Like, if there's any folks on here that I know are actively using it, Jiaxin, interested on your input. Would using a single objective be viable for MVP? Because this objective would imply priority class, and I do try to mention that here. By specifying a latency objective and an SLO specifically, we are placing these use cases in a higher priority class. I know that might need to be teased out in the future, but for MVP, we're thinking that's acceptable. Would love to sign off here.
Yeah, I think for MVP this objective makes sense because the most of the I would say like the load balancing strategies like try to eliminate some like P99 like those spikes or I think that's the goal, right? I think for the MVP it makes sense, but in future, we would like to have the flexibility to extend to other objectives. Yeah, so overall plan, I think makes sense.
And just out of curiosity, what kind of objectives would you like to extend to, if you have any off the top of mind? If not, that's not a big deal.
I think there's some like experiment ongoing on our side. The overall we like to optimize the cost, but when we convert to the routing part or to the gateway goals, I'm not that sure how to convert the objective. For example, we have some heterogeneous like deployments, right? In that case, we like to balance the request across different devices to cut the cost comparing to using a single like GPU device. So the overall goal, the business goal is a cost oriented or cost efficient like routing. But when we come to the goal objectives for the gateway, we are not that sure like how to map it at this moment. We'll try to build the connection later. Yeah. So that's one example.
Okay, so
does
is
it make
this
sense?
like? It sounds like you're trying to do the distributed request, or I don't remember the name of it, but that was a separate work stream, right? Where you have like your prefill and your decode distributed across different devices, or?
No, not the like the prefill disaggregation story. Just the thing we don't have enough like GPU type GPU devices for model. We have to use different like devices. So in that case, what's the right ratio? Like how to balance the GPUs, and that's the first like allocation problem. The second problem is the routing problem. So since we have the different, we can think it's the backend pools, right? So how can we distribute our like request across different devices to get overall like the low cost? I think that's the goal of the use case I talked about. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's not related to the disaggregation or any distributed. Just because of the short of the GPU capacity, we have to use the heterogeneous devices. But when we introduce the heterogeneous devices, then there's a lot of problems we have to solve, right? There's the if we route the request to some of the GPUs, which is slow, we see very long tail, like high spike latencies, and the cost wide, we also need to optimize it, even affect the auto scaling strategies. So those are, I mean, those are kind of a complex problem. So my point is, if we think, if we target a single GPU type, then the latency-based objective totally makes sense. But when we come to some complex scenarios, basically we consider other like objectives as well, like cost-based or like overall throughput-based as well. Since some of the instance we may launch in pipeline parallelism, so in that case, we probably like to, for example, when we see some high spikes, we like to use those kind of the instance to consume the request as fast as possible. Or it also becomes a problem in the batch API scenarios. I mean, yeah. So if I think here the design principle is if we want to make sure the objective is extensible, then that's okay. So I don't have further concerns because this is can be extended. Yeah.
Right. And our thinking just specifically around like throughput-based objectives versus latency-based objectives. Curious on your opinion here. We are considering those essentially diametrically opposed, and a pool would not be able to mix and match. Like if you had a use case with latency objective and a use case with a throughput objective, we don't see those being able to work in the same pool. Does that sound reasonable to you? Does your logic agree with that? And this is future use, but this is good to know.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Sorry, I missed that.
So no, it's fine. You just mentioned future objectives where you might be focused on throughput.
Right.
Do you believe that a throughput objective and a latency objective could live in the same pool? It's my understanding that those two objectives, we would not be able to really intermix those. So you would basically you would specify at the pool level that this pool accepts throughput-based objectives. This pool accepts latency-based objectives.
I get your point. I think so most of the time I think different pools will have different objectives. So there's some special cases like one example is the batch API, right? There's one, I think some of the solutions adopt the design to co-locate batch API request and online request together. So in that case, I think that it could be changed, but I would say that's the kind of the edge case or advanced use case. I think we don't need to care that much here. Yeah. At least in the initial version, yeah.
Cool. And I see a question in the chat, the heuristic based on the queue duration. So, and I will actually, maybe I should put this in one of our axioms, but our goal is I would consider queuing at the model server level a failure on our part. Rob, is that your understanding as well? That was kind of my running assumption. Our goal is to not queue at the model server level because that would inefficiently use the pool.
Basically, if you can make queuing at a more central level, you can ideally make more efficient routing decisions, right? If you're just sending every request as you get it to a backend server, then it's going to be harder to achieve the objectives, fairness, whatever that you've set out, than if you hold requests until the backends are actually ready or almost ready to process them. Like I don't want to say all queuing at backend level is bad, but any request that sits there for a prolonged period of time is bad.
Yeah, that's also like what we realized because we have our own batching component, I guess queuing component on top of all the model servers. So just to get this global view of queuing, which achieves optimal routing for us. But in some cases, I think for like certain frameworks like Triton, for example, you have like the in-flight batching and you have their own like view of a queue that you sort of need to essentially like cooperate and like work with. But I'm aligned that like all queuing should happen at the gateway level. Like that totally makes sense because we need the global view.
Yeah. And just to clarify, we are using LoRa and VLLM commonly because that is the most tangible use case for us to grab. But the goal is for this gateway to work for any set of, like, if you can share use cases across this infrastructure, the goal is for this to be effective. That I would consider within scope. I think we have Evan and then Vaibhav. Evan, please go ahead.
Do you have any explicit discussion of the assumed trade-off or orthogonality of the two, like the latency and throughput objectives in the proposal? I actually don't think you have the updated proposal on the PR yet. I think it's just on your fork. Is that correct?
Oh, I should have synced it. I'll check on.
Either way, I just wanted to make you aware of that. But yeah, I think it would be useful of making that assumption explicit that like an objective right now we're only focusing on latency, but could extend to throughput in the future, and that those would be seen as kind of orthogonal or mutually exclusive objectives, except for in advanced use cases, right?
Yeah. I will clarify that. I intend to work quite a bit more on this. And I think I will put that in our glossary where we kind of define terms. So like latency-based routing, I'll put in throughput-based routing, and kind of where we think that is. That is a fair call out. Apologies. I would have loved to have a little bit more here, but I think Vaibhav, it looks like you put your hand down. I'm going to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, going back to the previous thread on using model server queues. I just want to call out that, while the inference gateway work primarily is around maintaining some sort of queuing centrally, there is also work being done in Envoy as well as cloud load balancing to ingest metrics from the mod server, including like queue depth, and use those as criteria to pick sort of the least loaded backend. So there is that work also happening. Just want to call out that it's not completely disconnected and ignored, so to speak.
Sure. Cool. Abdullah, I think you're.
Yeah, I just want to mention that just like taking one step back. So we're saying that there are, let's assume, like two use cases. You have a production use case and a test use case. The production use case will set an objective. The test use case will not set an objective. Like they don't have like, a specific latency objective. We're assuming that the production one will take priority over the non-production one. So that's one, just as I want to explicitly call out here and make sure that everybody is aligned on this assumption. But also, as we're routing traffic, the production use case we will try to basically route it to model servers that can achieve the target latency. But for the one that does not have an objective, we will actually try to employ a different criteria, minimize cost, high throughput, and so forth. So even initially, we will have some sort of like mixed, but it's not like, I don't know how to call that out, but I don't know what's the group thinking here. Like use cases that do not set an objective, those test use cases, they don't have a target latency, and so we can do whatever we want with them to maximize the efficiency of our backend pool, right?
Sorry, one more time, Abdullah, if that was to me. Just the last.
Oh, the last part is, again, like the use cases without an objective. Because they don't have an objective, we're not trying to route them based on like a latency target. We will probably gonna be routing them based on, throughput, like or like cost efficient criteria.
Yes, right. Absolutely agreed that in the face, and we should clarify that the priority class only comes into play in resource scarcity. Otherwise, absolutely, we're trying to be as cost effective as possible. Make sure that is in the axiom. I'll add that to the axiom as well. I'll make a note. So we have 15 minutes left. I just want to make sure with everyone here, as I would consider everyone here invested parties, does our current direction sound reasonable for an alpha? You know, as we continue to work and discover, there, I'm sure we'll have changes, but is this a reasonable enough broad brushstroke direction to head? Well, I'm getting thumbs up from Evan. Sweet. Awesome. That's kind of all I have. I'll have some takeaways. I'll update the proposal with a lot more information. I want to add 2 axioms here. The one being that we intend to, for the most part, try to minimize queuing at the model server level based off that global perspective. And then also when we are not in a resource scarcity mode, we are attempting to be cost effective while still respecting any SLO specified. Unless there's anything else, I think we can give some time back. Paul, I see you have a hand up.
Hi, sorry, just I know that we already mentioned that yesterday, but for the MVP, I think it's perfect that we address only LoRa and VLLM, but definitely, like Marwan mentioned, probably having more options would be great in the next version, and not just focus on LoRa and VLLM.
Sure. Would love explicit feedback on like what we would like to support.
Yeah.
If you want to add that to the notes or message me directly on Slack.
Yeah, we can work on our side. We can work to gather more feedback around other use cases that we could integrate in the next version. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, prompt templates. Yeah, Mathis, that is one that I think we can support fairly easily because we're already doing body modification. I think that's something that we could support. If that's what Paul's referring to, that might be 2 birds, 1 stone. But yeah, prompt templates was something we were thinking of. Sweet. Cool. All right. Thank you all so much. This has been incredibly helpful on my side. Hopefully, it's been helpful for you. And we'll catch you all next time.
Thanks. Everyone. Bye-bye.